Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending the seminar series webinar organized by the Professional Development and Enrichment Subcommittee of the Professional and Administrative Senate. My name is Lisa Radke. I'm a senator on the P&A Senate representing the Duluth campus and the Kirby Student Center, and I'm also a member of the PD&E Subcommittee. We are grateful to see so many people in attendance for today's event. On behalf of all of us here at the P&A Senate, we appreciate and value your engagement in our programming. Our session today is titled Managing Up to Me, Creating Positive Supervisory Relationships. Learning how to establish proactive, productive supervisory relationships with our direct reports is always a timely subject, which is evidenced by over 900 registrants for this session. This 60-minute session will explore strategies and action plans for onboarding new staff, adapting guidelines when staff continue in their roles beyond the first year, and facilitating professional development opportunities. Whether you supervise new employees or long-term staff, you will leave this session with valuable insights and tools to create positive relationships. I am thrilled to welcome our presenter and my coworker and supervisor, Jenny Eltink. Jenny serves as the director of the Kirby Student Center at the Duluth campus and has more than 25 years experience supervising professional staff and building strong staff teams. Jenny's work in higher education spans multiple departments, including housing, residence life, student financial education, first year and transfer programs, and college unions and student activities. She is a frequent presenter at regional and inter and national conferences through the Association of College Unions International and has held volunteer roles at all levels of the association. In fact, Jenny shared this presentation last year at the national conference and was asked to give a repeat presentation due to its demand. A quick word about how today's webinar will work. Jenny has prepared a slide deck, which will be available following the presentation. Once the presentation is done, we will have approximately 15 minutes for question and answer. I encourage you all to use the Q&A feature of Zoom to post questions at any time during today's webinar. Please do not use the chat for this. If you have any technical issues or questions, Emily Melcher and Jamie Dillon from the PD&E committee will assist. Please message them directly via the Zoom chat. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available to all registrants via email when it is ready, as well as on the P&A Senate website. However, it might take a few weeks for that recording to be available. We have to caption it, and that takes some time. In the meantime, please remain patient. With all of that out of the way, I will hand things over to Jenny.
Great, Lisa. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your busy day. I realized when I had first sort of pitched this session for the Association of College Unions International that this was something that maybe would be good for some folks to be thinking about. I never anticipated that this would be something that so many people would resonate with. And I hope that today's presentation gets you thinking, gives you some resources, and that you take something very actionable away from it. So we'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. The University of Minnesota campuses reside on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. This land has been cared for and called home by the Ojibwe, Dakota, Ho-Chunk, and other Native people from time immemorial, and holds historical, spiritual, and personal significance for its original stewards, the Native peoples and nations of this region. We recognize and support and advocate for the sovereignty of the Native nations in this territory and beyond. And this image here is from last March's Zigwan Powwow, which was held here in Duluth, put on by our Indigenous student organization. So as we think about today, hopefully you are here because you're interested in managing up. But this is not a traditional presentation about how you manage up to your supervisors. Rather, that's something that while we think about that piece a lot, oftentimes we haven't given as much attention as we would have liked to how we guide the people who report to us in managing up to us. And that's why it's called Managing Up to Me. The slide deck today is going to be pretty plain and actually pretty wordy. And that's intentional because we're hoping that when you get this slide deck, it can be a reference for you. So know that we are not expecting that you're going to be writing things down or screenshotting. The presentation hopefully will be able to kind of jog your memory as you go back through this and implement this in your own work in a way that'll be useful to you. Having said that, here is what we are hoping you're going to walk away with in a little less than an hour. We're hoping that you'll be able to develop some strategies for onboarding direct reports that include expectations about communication, span and scope of control, and independence of decision making. Thinking about actions for working through some common problems with direct reports as they're managing up to you, and explore some best practices for providing constructive feedback, realigning behavior with expectations, and then creating plans for employee growth and professional development. So we're going to start with some stories. I'm wanting you to think back and see, do any of these stories sound familiar? So your assistant director, Alex, has been in their position for about 18 months. They've been working on a survey that'll go out to a sample of approximately 3,000 students with questions from several campus departments. In your initial meetings with Alex about the survey, you emphasized that collaboration is key to getting buy-in from other campus departments to really make these results actionable. You later learned from a colleague that although Alex got information from partner departments about what they wanted to ask, Alex didn't review the wording of those actual questions with those departments. And as a result, those departments feel that the survey data won't be useful since the questions didn't get at what those departments really want to know. And these departments are expressing frustration since their participation in this survey precludes them from doing a survey of their own. Or maybe there's a situation, right, where you have Riley, who's a newer coordinator in your department. In planning for an event featuring graduating students and university administrators, they invite the collegiate deans, as has been done in years past. And hearing that the president and the vice president for student life are popular with students, Riley decides to invite them as well. But then you receive an upset call from the provost, who was a dean until his appointment as provost this year. And he's heard that the deans, the VP for student life, and the president were all invited, but he was not. And so he considers this a pretty significant insult both to his history as a dean and his current position as provost. And this is the first you're hearing that the VP and the president were invited, so this whole situation takes you by surprise. Or you're new to the department, but you supervise Jordan, who's been in their position for 10 or so years. And Jordan's the department's subject matter expert in their area of work, and everyone on the team needs to interact with Jordan on a regular basis. Jordan is quick to clear their task list every day and produces an excellent quality work product, but colleagues and your customers have described them as prickly and overly blunt. When you ask Jordan about their communication style and behavior, they tell you that they get paid to produce good work, not to make people happy. And as you're getting to know the department, you realize that a significant number of customers are asking other staff for assistance rather than working with Jordan, even though Jordan is the expert in that area. So in all of these stories, right, there's a misalignment and sort of a lack of good managing up. And so when we see here kind of issues that are identified, it's about misaligned expectations, about miscommunication, about assumptions, understanding, making surprises, not prioritizing, and winding up with negative unintended consequences. And that's about as far as oftentimes when we think about people managing up to us that we go. But part of it is that we need to get more specific. And so all of the rest of today's presentation is about that specificity. So if we think about it, really it's misaligned expectations of scope or span of control, right? Miscommunication about the independence of decision making, assumptions about what people do or don't already know, a misaligned understanding of the frequency and detail of communication needed, right? Surprising a supervisor or an institutional leader, not prioritizing the right things, misunderstanding the full or holistic responsibilities of the job, and negative unintended consequences for campus or community relationships. So some of these issues span all three of those stories. Some of them are specific to a particular story, but all three of these come out of real life situations that I've been involved with as a manager. And a lot of what I know about management, I've learned by doing things the wrong way. And when you go out and things don't go the way that you want, the absolute best thing you can do is figure out how next time to make it right. And that's a sort of fundamental piece that we're going to be talking about today. So let's talk about what managing up to me really looks like. So when we think about translating managing up, I want you to think and make some quick notes for yourself, right? I said at the beginning that a lot of times we've thought much more about how we manage up to our supervisors and to our sort of supervisors than we think about how to prime people to manage effectively up to us. So, what knowledge, skills, or behaviors do you prioritize when you're managing up to your supervisor or to institutional leaders? Right? Do you know how your own supervisor wants to be managed up to? And if so, how did you figure that out? And how can you translate what you know to helping your own direct reports and or indirect reports manage up to you? So let's think about kind of what managing up to me isn't and what it is. So I am sometimes needing to be kind of really clear about what managing up to me isn't. On the one end of the spectrum, managing up to me is not you as my direct report getting to pretend that you're my boss and telling me what to do. On the other end of the spectrum, at the bottom of this slide, managing up to me isn't me saying my way the highway or I'm the boss of you. And so it's finding some of that good middle ground. Managing up to me isn't the same as manipulating me or just playing the game or sucking up. I've sometimes had direct or indirect reports who have said, "Ugh, I don't want to play the game. I just want to do my job." The game is part of the job. And calling it the game, or saying, oh, managing up is just sucking up, really loses the importance of the relational piece of the work that we do, and what Bullman and Deal in their sort of classics of organizational development talk about as the political frame. This is a vital piece of the work. And so people need to realize that this is part of the job. I also sort of say that managing up to me is not trying to change my leadership or management style. I am who I am, and I will meet people part way. But the expectation that I am somebody entirely different as someone manages up to me is just not realistic. It's hard to pretend to be someone you're not. And finally, managing up beyond me is not just going above my head to get a different decision or a different outcome when you don't like it. What managing up to me really is co-creating a working relationship that makes both of us more effective and that minimizes mistakes and understandings. It's about establishing really clear priorities and supporting you in your work. It's also about recognizing that we have different needs and different perspectives based on our organizational roles, our identities, and the experiences that we bring into that position. Managing up to me is also about managing risk for both of us, as well as for our department, our division, or our campus. And it's about finding ways to leverage your strengths and mine individually as a team of two for our larger team, for the good of both of us and for the department, the division, and campus. And so managing up to me is really a proactive way of ensuring that you're setting the conditions for good employee engagement, for positive work environments, and for making the kind of working relationship that's going to feel most effective. So let's talk a little bit about onboarding. So you're going to have folks who are coming into their roles. A lot of times when we're doing onboarding, we're thinking a lot about sort of the task stuff. We're thinking about the job duties. We're thinking about the logistics, right? Of where do you park? Where do you eat? Do you have your employee ID? But getting folks to be thinking about managing up to you is also a vital part of the onboarding process. So part of it is being really explicit and specific about how their strengths complement yours and how their work, soft skills as well as job duties, contributes to yours. Not just here is what you're going to be doing, but here is what I do, and here's how that comes together. Being really specific about how their work impacts the department, the division, and the campus and helps those entities achieve their stated missions. Tell them what matters most to you and what you really care about. It can be really overwhelming for new employees, particularly as they're thinking about learning their job and learning their relationship with you as a supervisor, to figure out what is most important to you. Be really specific about how they can make your job easier or less stressful. And then finally, being explicit about how they can best get feedback from you and how they can best follow up with you when they need something from you. So if we think back to those stories we started with, right? Was the issue with Riley inviting too many people and also too few to that sort of big event an issue of not knowing how to follow up? Is that sort of what happened with the all-campus survey? And so when you're really clear about here's how you get feedback from me, here's how you follow up with me when you need something, that opens the door for better, more effective, and more timely communication. You're also going to want to be really specific about explaining their role's scope or span of control and how that might or will change as they gain experience in their work. Sometimes we don't articulate that right now, as you're learning your job, we're going to have you sort of have a smaller scope of control, right? As you learn the job, as you learn and develop relationships with important people around you, right? As you become more familiar with our institutional context, that's going to expand, right? Or the piece about like the role of level of independence in decision making, as well as some situations where that might never change. If there is communication that is happening with particular levels of the organization or people who are in particular sort of positions around the organization, I might always, no matter how much time you've been on the job, still want to be involved in that decision, right? Sensitively share possible political or relational stumbling blocks, as well as the greatest sources of possible risk. So if there is some department where there's some tension because of something that happened, right? Or we know that certain kinds of situations seem a little bit more fraught. If we're not sharing that information, again, in a sensitive and professional way, we're not giving our direct reports all of the information that they need in order to be specific. And in fact, we may be setting them up for frustration or failure. And then being really explicit about their priorities in their first months, both task and relationship, and how that will change over time. So as you start to think about continuing engagement, right? You've got folks, they've been on the job maybe for a year or so. They've been through the whole cycle. They've seen the whole year's worth of work. And now you want to continue that engagement. Hopefully, you're ready for a different kind of managing up to me relationship. So part of it is revisiting their first months or their first year. What do they think they've grown the most on? Where do they struggle and what would help? Addressing both the task and relational aspects of the work. What have they noticed about the potential stumbling blocks that you shared during onboarding? What other stumbling blocks did they encounter? How were they handled and what did they learn? And what else do they need to know more about in order to succeed? You can sort of also then think forward. As that scope of control or that independence of decision making grows bigger, then are there new relationships that they might need to be thinking about? Are there new tasks? Are there new potential stumbling blocks? And so this is both about sort of figuring out where they've been and what they've learned, and also what does the next step look like? You're also going to want to revisit how their strengths complement yours and how their work, again, soft skills and job duties, contributes to yours. What have you both learned and what may need to be adjusted in order to maximize your working relationship? And then asking them what would help them feel more engaged with their work, what barriers they're experiencing that hinders their engagement, and what role they envision for you and for them in addressing those barriers. So a lot of us have recently gotten information about the employee engagement survey, right? And they talk about there's two dimensions to that, right? There is sort of the dimension of the work environment, which as supervisors we have some control over. But then there is also sort of that dimension of the employee's own engagement. And so we want to be thinking about both of those pieces and making sure that we realize that both of us have a role in making that better. So then, if appropriate, right, increase their level of independence in decision making or scope or span of control, and be really explicit about revised boundaries and expectations. Finally, if it is appropriate, provide opportunities for them to observe or participate in your work or the work of their colleagues. Sometimes when someone's struggling to see that bigger picture or to be able to sort of manage up effectively to you, being able to understand and seeing the context of the sort of boundaries of scope of control or independence of decision making aids understanding. And so sometimes it's not until people understand their own jobs and start to understand other people's jobs that they can really understand that managing up relationship. Hopefully, you're going to have employees who are going to stick around for a long time. And that's when we get into the professional development piece of managing up to me. And this, in part, is sort of about figuring out, are you now helping somebody manage up to you and also preparing them for being managed up to, right? So it's about professional development for folks next, possible opportunities. But then there are also possibilities in there for you to then coach folks who are your direct reports to make sure that they're effectively coaching their direct reports. Everything that we're talking about today applies both to the people who directly work for you and then also the folks who are kind of your skip level on the organizational chart, right? So who are the people who report to the people who report to you? You have a role in that as well. And part of that if you have managers that are reporting to you as a manager, right? That managing up to me is understanding what you need to know about their own work, but also the work of the team that reports to them. So this is when we get really into providing targeted opportunities for observation and involvement in your work or the work of others. The additional context on their work, your work, the work of the department, the division, the campus, and really digging into the why and how and who of administrative acumen and political savvy. And I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about this idea of administrative acumen or about political savvy. I had the opportunity a number of years ago to be involved in rewriting the core competencies for my professional association. And in that process, we realized that we had a very clear understanding of what development looked like for almost all of the skill sets and knowledge sets within those competencies, except for how do you teach administrative acumen? How do you teach political savvy? And that is all about context and skill development. And so, although sometimes in our one-on-one meetings, we're again very sort of focused on the task pieces of the work, it's also really important at this point to be focused on the relationship piece and the administrative acumen and political savvy piece. As scope and span of control increase, as independence of decision making increases, you're going to know and sort of be involved in less and less of that day-to-day work. But nobody ever wants to be surprised. And so part of the sort of administrative acumen and political savvy of the folks who are reporting to you is working with you on understanding what are the things that they can truly handle completely on their own. What are the things that they are going to be able to make the decision on or have some control over, but you need to sort of be involved maybe in that process? Or is it a situation where they're going to be sort of consulting with you and you're going to make the decision together? Or where they bring you the information and you make the decision? Or we provide information and somebody else, higher in the org charter elsewhere in the organization, is going to make that decision. And frequent conversations about that administrative acumen, that political savvy, is really going to help in the professional development, is going to help you feel more confident in increasing that decision making and that scope and span of control if you can be really explicit about the political savvy piece and what they need to know. So part of that then is encouraging complexity of thought and consideration of context and history and possible futures. So as you get into situations, where have we been? What did we learn from that? How does that impact where we are today? And how does that impact how this decision might get made or might get implemented, or who needs to be at the table? And so this is why sort of both historical thinking context matters and also kind of ideation and visioning for future matters. And so when we come back to this conversation about sort of relying on one another's strengths, some people might be more attuned to what's possible. Some people might be more attuned to where we've been. And so if you can bring those strengths together, you're going to create a really good opportunity for understanding and breaking down these complex situations. And I think it's also really important, again, within the role and understanding that you sort of may hit a boundary, but continuing as much as possible as people prove themselves to you to continue to expand the scope or span of control and the level of independence. There is something about having that control over your work or feeling like you get to have not just the responsibility, but also the authority to be able to do things that really helps people grow and develop in their professional skills and make them better at managing up to you. So consider their role as a supervisor, right? This is where we get into specific conversations. What have they learned or done to help people manage up to them? How does that change how they manage up to you? And exploring what complexities are created in managing up in multi-level supervision. And so I work for a relatively small department, but I still have folks who report to me, professional staff, folks who report to them, who are professional staff, and then a really dedicated team of students who help us run our building 13 hours a day, 7 days a week, who report to them. So what does that look like where you're in the middle of that sandwich? What does it look like for us as we filter up to our supervisors? How do we pull that information in and make sure that the people who are reporting to us are helping us then in turn manage up to those other folks? A really important piece here is to acknowledge that all of us have a growing edge and we should all be continually learning. I hopefully do not in any way, shape, or form pretend that I know everything there is to know about this and that I don't make mistakes. I constantly have situations where I know I need to grow and improve and learn. And so, conversations specifically about what knowledge and skills do the folks who are reporting to you want to improve, and what knowledge and skills are you looking for them to improve on is going to help you be a better supervisor and managing. And then the final thing is to talk honestly and respectfully about what areas of managing up or providing feedback to you are still a struggle for them. Hopefully, you're creating the conditions where people feel like they can be open and honest with you as a supervisor. You, in turn, need to be open and honest with them as well. And so we oftentimes see situations where people say, well, I know that something's not right, but my supervisor didn't really get specific. I'm looking for specific, concrete, actionable things, right? Making plans for addressing issues that arise and sort of working on that development and identifying specific places, specific projects, or specific relationships where they can do that skill development is going to be really important. So, as we think about, right, what things are a struggle or addressing issues, let's talk about when a mistake is made. So, the first question that I've learned to ask myself is this a mistake? Asking myself, is this a mistake or is it a different but acceptable approach to the work or relationship or process? Sometimes just because something isn't the way that I would have done it doesn't mean that it's wrong, doesn't mean that it's not right. And so there's an opportunity here to take a step back and to ask yourself, is this a mistake or is it just a different approach? If it's the latter, this is an excellent opportunity for you to double check your judgments about work style, scope of control, decision making, task achievements, or relationships. And exploring this with your supervisee, sharing your perspective, and asking for theirs. This can be a really powerful conversation to say, when you were in that situation and this happened, my first instinct was to think of it maybe as, did this not go right? Because that's not the way that I would have done it. But then I realized that your approach actually makes sense, right? Here's some things that I would have done. What is it that you did, right? This is an opportunity for you to learn and continue to work on your growing edges as a supervisor, but also an opportunity for you to share your own perspective and your own wisdom, because who knows if the next time they're in that situation, they might wind up doing it the same or they might do it a little bit differently. If the circumstances are a little different or the people are a little different, or they see some value in your approach and they want to do it a little bit differently. If it's the former, if you do this reflection and you say, nope, there was a mistake. There was what one of my former colleagues would call a mess. You need to spend some time with yourself, explicitly considering the balance of responsibility in creating the conditions for the mistake, fixing that mistake if that's even possible, minimizing future risk, and then repairing damaged relationships. So, what does that look like? So, sometimes the mistake was made by you as the supervisor. And when it's mostly you who made the mistake, it is really important to acknowledge your role and your responsibility in that. Did you give the right amount of guidance or the right amount of context? Were expectations clear about timelines, independence, and scope of control? Did you not give clear expectations? Or was it a situation where you gave too much independence or too much control in a situation that should have had tighter boundaries? Discuss how things are going to change in order to minimize the chances of future mistakes. Being really clear about next time we're in a situation, I'm going to make sure that I do X, Y, and Z to make sure that expectations are clear, or we give the right amount of guidance, or we have appropriate boundaries on what you're responsible for. And then clearly outline what needs to happen next and who's responsible for which tasks and which relationships. And so just because the mistake was mostly made by you doesn't mean that you have all of the responsibility in fixing it, right? An opportunity for your supervisee to be part of fixing that situation gives them a chance to be able to sort of practice with those clearer expectations, right? With those better boundaries, and to be able to move forward. And it's important to offer acknowledgement and, if appropriate, an apology. I say if appropriate, only because I don't know the entirety of circumstances in which you might find yourself, but I have never yet, in almost 30 years as a professional in higher education, found a situation that an apology wasn't appropriate. And a good apology can go a long way toward repairing relationship sort of mess that you might have with your supervisee. So, what if that mistake is made by not you? What if that the most of the responsibility for that mistake is made by your supervisee? So let's start with thinking that expectations were clear, right? When expectations you think were pretty clear, you need to be specific, prompt, and respectful in your feedback conversations. When we think about Kirby Student Center, three of our most important departmental values are unconditional human worth, shared purpose, and caring community. And we not only go into all of our interactions with our students with that in mind, but also all of our interactions when we are addressing mistakes or we're having supervisory conversations. How do we do these conversations in a way that respects people's inherent human worth, that shows that we care about them and that we're in this together, right? So some sample language that I've used in the past and have sort of worked to repetitively enough make this feel natural, right? We talked about this. What happened? This leads with curiosity and leaves room for possibility. It's unlikely that aliens came down from space and suddenly beamed people off to Mars, and that's why the project didn't get done. Not probable, but I suppose it's possible. And when you lead with curiosity, you leave room in there for possibility. To say, I need X, Y, and Z to happen consistently, can you do that? You're providing specificity and asking for commitment. And then going into how can you fix this mistake? And what do you need from me to make that happen? So if things were pretty clear, right, and things just didn't happen the way that they were supposed to, that supervisee needs to take responsibility for fixing that mistake, but they need to know that they are not out there on your own. And so it's that balance of setting responsibility, but offering support to make it happen. Most often, though, expectations were sort of misaligned or uncertain. And so maybe you both have a role in this. What you're aiming for is clarity in the current situation and transferable learning for the future, right? So here's what I need you to know about X. So we have these conversations a lot in our department and our division about balcony and floor. And this comes from our former vice chancellor who said, you know, a lot of times employees are sort of out on the floor. They're doing their work, right? And what they can see is what's happening right around them. And that's where they're supposed to be. But as supervisors, sometimes I need you to come up and join me in the balcony where you have a different perspective And you can maybe see things in a different way than you could when you were down on the floor. And so sometimes misaligned expectations come from when an employee is thinking about it as a floor situation and you needed them to sort of be in the balcony. When we talked about the sort of who and what and why of the professional development around this, sometimes it's the balcony piece helps people understand, okay, so I know that from where you are, it looks like we should be going about it in this particular way or involving this particular group of people, or thinking about it in this context. The balcony view helps them sometimes understand why you might approach it differently or why you are couching this in a different scope or span of control or independence in decision making or sharing information about particular relationships. The next sort of piece is what can we do to make sure we're on the same page, right? So once we've figured out this kind of current situation, it's talking about how to recognize similar misalignments or uncertainties in the future and how to be proactively clarifying in them. This is all about transferable skills. We talk to our students all the time about transferable skills, and administrative acumen and political savvy and managing up is so much about sort of being able to recognize what happened in one situation and applying appropriate context to be able to figure that out in a new situation. And then finally, it's a how do we move forward with this situation? It's establishing shared responsibility and making sure that they have an opportunity to provide ideas about how to move forward. So sometimes it's all of these things, right? Sometimes some of it was a little unclear, but other pieces were very clear. The most important piece is to not be afraid to have that conversation. A lot of the management blogs that I read, a lot of the other things that I study, so many situations we get into because people are afraid to talk specifics. And in the day-to-day crush of trying to get the tasks done, they forget about the importance of that sort of managing up to me relationship. And so if you have a couple of kind of key things that you're going to hang on to from this presentation, part of what we're looking for is for you to be able to lean into specificity and to feel good and comfortable about spending time in developing and sort of proactively continuing to grow that relationship in the relationship piece as well as the task piece of that supervisory relationship. So if we really want to think about some key takeaways, right? I was putting together this presentation. I figured out, even as a Duluth employee, I could access the University of Minnesota's sort of photo shelter of photos, and I was delighted to find this picture in the Duluth area of that. So that is me in the bright yellow shirt. The person who is taking the selfie is our assistant director who reports to me. The guy with the big, great smile in the maroon pullover is one of our student activities coordinators who reports to her. And then, of course, the guy with the tie, that's my great grand boss, the chancellor of the Duluth campus. And so what you're seeing in here, right, is this sort of opportunity for figuring out what do things look like? Now, this was on the morning of commencement last year, right? We were having a great time. There wasn't a lot to manage in this particular situation, but certainly these kinds of things are always on our mind. So, some key takeaways. One, this is a forever task. You're never not going to be thinking about how you are getting folks to manage up to you, directly, indirectly. And this should be part of what is sort of always a piece of what you're working on with your supervisees. The second thing is that it's really rewarding. This is one of those things where investing the time in things up front and investing the time along the way really does reap benefits. not only for you in making your own job easier, but in creating a kind of environment that makes your supervisees want to stick around and creates a really positive work culture. And so part of it is that it is absolutely worth the effort. And I hope that as you go away from today, you are full of ideas that you can implement to make all of the University of Minnesota a better place for you to work and for everybody else. So, again, thanks so much for being here today, and your questions are most welcome.
Thanks, Jenny. This is Lisa again, and I'm going to facilitate the Q&A. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A, not in the chat. And so we have about 10 to 15 minutes to go through some questions. So the first one, Jenny, what are some tips in approaching managing up discussions with a 20-year SME prickly employee?
I will first giggle because this is a situation that I've been in, and it's not always easy. I'll say that a lot of times folks who are prickly are folks who maybe are really thinking about just the task piece of the job. It's a relatively, I think, new development that people understand that the relationship aspect of the job is also part of the job. So, as part of what I do indirectly, we have fraternity and sorority life. And sometimes when you cram a whole bunch of students right into a space, things get prickly. And so, in one situation, I said, you can believe whatever you want to believe and feel however you want to feel, but you cannot behave however you want to behave. Unbeknownst to me, that turned into a poster that went on the wall of our Greek life office. But I think that is the sort of fundamental piece. So establishing what is it about that prickly employee and in those kind of those situations, what are the specific things where that employee's behavior is affecting the team? So some of it, right, is that if this employee were just prickly by themselves, that's their business. But when it impacts other colleagues, when it impacts you as a supervisor, when it impacts your customers, that becomes a work issue. And so some of it is leaning in with curiosity, being specific about areas of concern, and then understanding that this is going to take some time, right? This is a situation probably where you're going to want to make sure that your own supervisor is on board with you having kind of these conversations and tackling this as a task. But part of it is that those relational pieces are as much about the job. They do not need to be specifically outlined in the job description. The job description is not comprehensive of everything they're going to do, but there are expectations at the university for how we interact with one another and how we do our work. And so leaning into that, what's going on? Help me understand this, right? And let's clarify expectations around this part of your role is a way to get started.
Thank you. Our next question, any tips on how to approach a conversation when a member of your management team is not meeting their commitments or not meeting them with timeliness? One, if the person is a peer on the management team, or two, if it's actually your superior.
Lisa, did you write this question about me?
I did not.
Um, so so part of this, right, is some of the same principles apply, right? And you can have a peer-to-peer conversation, and you can also sort of have the same conversation. Um, and think about, right, kind of that managing across or managing up. To couch it in your own work. So when I've had similar conversations, it might look something like, "Hey, you know, I've tried to be really specific with um, with the folks who report to me about what my priorities are. What are your priorities here? What is it that is happening, right? One of the priorities for me is being able to move forward. And so it feels like things are getting bottlenecked or things are not getting done. Can you help me understand what's happening here, right? Should I be prioritizing that? Should I be giving you feedback when there are things that I need from you? How would you like to receive that feedback? It's a little bit easier sometimes when it's a peer, because then you can sit down and sort of have that relationship as a colleague. But even when it's a supervisor, it's the ability to be able to say, I want to be successful in my role, and I know that part of my job is to help you be successful in yours. And so if this is sort of a concern for me, how do we figure out what that looks like so that both of us are getting our needs met?
Thank you, Jenny. Okay, so the next one. Can you speak about the transition for employees who are hired into a higher role in the organization?
So if you are coming in as an internal candidate, that can sometimes be the hardest thing ever. So there have been times in my professional career where I went from being the assistant director to being the director in the same department. There were times in my professional career where I went from being kind of a director colleague to coming to a director in a different department. Situations where I was a coordinator, right, and then became kind of a senior coordinator. And then I've also hired folks internally where people have moved up in the organization. And some of it is then really leaning into role clarification, being really specific with those supervisees, or in my case, with myself, about how my role is changing, what I need to leave behind, and what I'm picking up, how my relationships are going to be different in that new role. So, for example, when I came into Kirby Student Center from a different department on campus, I had worked really closely with a lot of the Kirby staff. But now that I was the department director, that relationship was going to look different. And so the more kind of open and honest that you can be about that changing role, that is going to help. The second thing is to give opportunity for folks then to ask questions and share information about what they are curious about or what they think you might need to know about your relationship with them in your new role or their new role. Not just to sort of have them say, okay, I'm in a new role and here's how things are going to be different, but also the people around them to be able to provide feedback. Because even though somebody's familiar with your institution or your organization or maybe even your department, they're seeing things from a different perspective. And so we need to treat that part of the onboarding almost as though they were a brand new employee. And I think a lot of times we kind of skip over that piece, but it becomes even more important for folks who are taking on a new role in the organization.
Thank you. Next question. Thanks for all the ideas about how to discuss the mistakes in different situations. Do you have any examples of what these conversations can look like practically in real time? For example, the questions are great and not necessarily questions that would be answered in one conversation.
So some of it, I think, is saying we don't need to get everything solved right now. There are some things that we can, and there are some things that are going to take more time. And so um, I think about a situation not from my current department, but from my previous department um, where there was a sort of mess that required immediate response. But where we said, okay, right now we need to figure this piece out. We need to work to fix the mistake in this sort of short-term time. But we are going to come back and we're going to talk more about what we learned and what we need to do differently going forward. And I think that context helps them know that when you come back to it, it's not just that you're piling on. It's not that you won't let it go, right? We already talked about this. Why are we talking about this again? But being able to say, okay, so here's what we need to do right now. And then here's sort of what we need to figure out. Here's what I need answers to right now. Here's what I want to give you some time to think about, or here's where I need some time to think about it. It is okay in all but the most emergency situations to say, I don't have all my thoughts together right now. So we're going to come back to this, right, when you've had a chance to think or I've had a chance to think. Um, and to do that in a sort of timely fashion that doesn't recognize that everything has to get figured out right in the moment, but also acknowledges that there are some things that sometimes do need to get figured out right now.
Thanks, Jenny. We just have a couple minutes left, but here's another question. I'm struggling with a direct report who consistently fails to meet performance expectations. I provided several weeks of intensive training, specific feedback, help with prioritization, and concrete examples, but there has been little improvement. They also seem to be struggling, and I've invested a significant amount of time in supporting them. I'm beginning to wonder whether this role is the right fit for them, but they say that they still want to learn. What should I do next?
Um, this is a great question and a super difficult conversation, and super difficult situation. I want to say that the first part of my response, you have already done, which is to say, are you sure that this role is the right fit for you? Um, Beyond that, then we need to get into when the employee says, "Yes, I really want to do this. I really want to," is coming up with clear metrics for what needs to happen. To say, okay, you want to stay on, you want to learn, and you want to grow. In order for that to happen, we need to see consistent X over a period of Y, right? So if it's about task or it's about relationships, these are the things that we need to have happen consistently without sort of additional retraining, right? And without me having to step in or other people having to step in to make sure that that happens and in a high quality way where we're not seeing mistakes. And so what is it that, after we've provided additional training, intensive training, right? Um, all of the things that you mentioned, we're not there yet. What do you, as the employee, think is going to change in the upcoming, not too long? Um, Everything that I sort of read about management and supervision says if it's not going to get better in 30 or 60 days, it's not going to get better, right? So saying the next 6 months or something is just sort of prolonging misery for everybody involved. So what is it that you think is going to change in the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks that's going to bring you up to that standard? And then the most sort of important piece is to be really specific and to say, if you can't meet that standard at that time, we can't keep you in this role and you're going to have to leave. We're going to have to let you go. Um, if you think that the outcome is that they need to reach a certain level of performance or they need to be gone, then you need to be really clear that that is the possible outcome. A lot of times we think as supervisors that we've been clear, And then if we have to let people go, or we have to, say we can't have you have these job duties, we need you to do sort of this other thing, they feel like they're blindsided. This is not a place where you want to use any sort of euphemistic language. If you can't do X by Y time period, you can't continue in this role, and we're going to have to let you go. We're going to have to fire you, lay you off, change your job duties, etc. And so part of this, right, is you're outlining what you've already done. You're specifically outlining what it is that is expected of them by the time period, putting the responsibility on them to take up their piece of it, and then clearly outlining that consequence. And I feel for you because that is just about the toughest situation to be in.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, we have reached the end of our webinar. Just wanted to let everyone know that I know there was more questions in the Q&A. Those will be shared with Jenny, and she will respond to those, and that information will come out with the copy of the slides and the recording of the presentation. But I want to thank you, Jenny, for sharing your presentation with us today. On behalf of the P&A Senate, we so appreciate your time in speaking to us and such a relevant topic. I'm sure our discussion today was both interesting and informative for everyone in attendance. As a reminder, the recording of the presentation and slides will be shared in a few weeks. We also want to make one last plug for our next P&A policy pop-up about navigating time away on April 8th. The flyer just went out yesterday. We also very much value your feedback and participation at our events. We ask that you please fill out our post-event evaluation, which has been posted in the chat, and you will also receive it via email. Before we end, I want to encourage everyone to consider serving on the P&A Senate. If you value programming like today's webinar, it takes the participation and encouragement of people like you to make it happen. Plus, of course, every voice matters. If you are interested in learning more about the Senate governance, please go online to University Senate website at usenate.umn.edu. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.